I was admittedly not a massive fan of the Acolyte. I didn't think it was the crime against humanity some made it out to be, but I think just above Kenobi it was, for me, one of the lower tier live action Star Wars shows. That being said, I thought some of the characters like Master Saul or Indara were interesting. I wanted to learn more about the Stranger, Darth Plagueis, and what was going on with the Sith, of course. So when it was announced that we would be getting an Acolyte tie-in novel, Wayseeker, I was excited, especially given the fact that the cover had both Master Indara and Vernestra Rwoh. For those not familiar, Vernestra Rwoh is a character who first appeared in the High Republic. She's really the star of the High Republic young reader novels, one of the major characters of the High Republic, and of course, as a long-lived individual, she is still active into Season 1 of The Acolyte and beyond. The problem is, this book, in almost every single way for me, was a massive, massive disappointment. Now, we'll be getting into spoilers here. If you are interested in the novel, read it first, it's quite short, but let's start and talk about placement and timeline, because we're in a very weird period here. So, while it's not technically the earliest chronological event of the period, the High Republic was started by the novel Light of the Jedi, which takes place in 232 BBY, i.e., 230 years before the Battle of Yavin. Now, I'll admit, I wasn't a fan of this. I wanted the High Republic to be set further back because I felt like its proximity to the prequels sort of by necessity limited the scale of the action we could get, and I think I ended up being right. The High Republic as an initiative has largely been about a conflict against a marauder group known as the Nile. I like some of the characters in the High Republic: Elzar, Avar Kriss, Lena So, Porter Engle, Geode. There were many that did it for me, but I thought the world building in the High Republic was fairly weak, and the conflict just was never really compelling for me. But to reiterate, the first book takes place in 232 BBY. The final adult novel of the initiative, Trials of the Jedi, takes place in 228. Vernestra, as a reference, was born around 250 BBY. Now, the Acolyte takes place 100 years after the start of the High Republic era, so 132 BBY. It's a pretty big time jump, and there's a lot to talk about there. But where does the Acolyte Wayseeker take place? You would think, given that it's a tie-in novel to the Acolyte, it would explore the events preceding the novel, or maybe even after. No. The Acolyte Wayseeker exists in this weird bubble where nothing else is happening. 160 BBY, so still nearly 30 years before the events of the TV show, though of course the TV show does have flashbacks, of which this novel precedes by several years, but still of course over half a century after the end of the High Republic. Why this novel to me is so disappointing is because although having an Acolyte prefix, it's got nothing to do with the show. There are no meaningful tie-ins other than learning a little bit about the backstory of Indara and, to a lesser degree, Vernestra Rwoh. In this novel, Vernestra is a fully established character. She's very much like she is in the TV show because, yes, she's younger, but she's still sort of a senior Jedi Master, one of the most famous within the Order. But yeah, the book exists in this weird space where nothing is happening and nothing can happen. The book does nothing to establish world building. We learn nothing about the state of the galaxy. We learn just a little about the Jedi Order. And disappointingly, looking at the timeline, I thought we might learn a little about Vernestra and whatever happened with her and the Stranger, i.e. Khmer. But we learn nothing. There's one sentence where she references an apprentice who she failed, but that's it. This book represents one of the major issues Star Wars has had over the past several years with tie-in novels. They can't do anything. Justina Ireland, I don't really blame her because I'm sure she was given a directive to not write anything which could not later be undone. The Acolyte isn't getting a second season. That probably was not clear when she was writing this novel, but even still, they would have wanted plot threads open for a future big novel or however else they choose to continue that sort of storytelling. So the Acolyte attachment to this book is a complete and total lie. It's got nothing to do with the Acolyte. What it really is a continuation or really a postscript of the High Republic era. If you haven't read the High Republic and you jump into this novel, you're really going to miss most of it because a lot of it references Vernestra's past, her past friends, apprentices, enemies. And what's also frustrating is because we're in this era where nothing's been established and we know no characters, everyone in this book is either completely forgettable because they've been just established, or it's another case of Star Wars unnecessarily elongating someone's life to keep them in the action. Ki-Adi-Mundi in the Acolyte didn't really bother me because it was more of a cameo, but Vernestra Rwoh, out of nowhere, being over like 150 years old, I thought that was super weird, and this novel does the same with characters like Ty York, who are far living beyond the natural lifespan of a human because they've got no other way to tie this book into characters we already know. Now, to be clear, Ty York, like Vernestra, is not a human. Rather, she's a humanoid alien, specifically a Thalothan. But I don't know. To me, it's pretty lame when you've got all these humanoid aliens, essentially humans with different color skin or appendages or whatever, who get these weird, unnatural lifespans. It takes a bit away from Yoda and the other existing long-lived aliens. But again, this book is placed in an era where there's nothing that can happen, so I understand why Justina Ireland had to do that. Although Ty York ended up being kind of wasted in the novel, in my opinion. Anyway, what is the plot, you might be wondering? Well, Vernestra is a Wayseeker at that point, basically a Jedi operating outside the Order, sort of roaming across the galaxy doing good. Indara is the opposite after a traumatic event. She's been a shut-in, essentially. The Jedi Council sends her to retrieve Vernestra, and as they're doing so, the two run into a device which is able to disable lightsabers. I imagine it's sort of like Dumbledore's thing in the first Harry Potter book. Anyway, throughout the novel, they're basically just tracking down the person who made it, and that's it. The real development we get is seeing the first time Indara and Vernestra meet and how they sort of warm to each other, and Indara eventually makes the decision to become a Wayseeker on her own. But to me, I don't know, it's just not compelling. I did like the writing and the relationship between the two women. I didn't think the book was well written overall. I haven't read too much of Justina Ireland's work, but this book was bad, and I would not recommend it. For a longer discussion, you can check out my podcast, Tapcaf Transmissions. I gave it a C, which is generous. This book wasn't actively bad like some Star Wars novels, but it arguably had the worst quality of just being boring. In hindsight, I was going between a C and a D. We'll see where it ends up finally, but like many Star Wars canon novels, unfortunately, this ended up being absolutely forgettable. Who will enjoy this book? I think fans of the High Republic will probably enjoy what is ultimately a bookend to the era. Obviously, the main initiative is over, but we will be getting more High Republic stories. This book does a lot of reminiscing, so if you're in the mood for that, I think you will enjoy it. But I don't know, for me, it was boring, it was disappointing, it did nothing to make me want to revisit The Acolyte. And this isn't a fundamental quality of Star Wars canon novels, because some of the best Star Wars books ever, including Lost Stars, including the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, have come from Star Wars canon, but this certainly is not one of them. Those are my thoughts anyway. Let me know yours down below.